So hi, everyone. I am Megan Garber. I work at the foundation here as an assistant editor at the Nieman Journalism Lab. We are a collaborative effort to report on news innovation and to essentially try to figure out the future of journalism. So today, this is our last panel of the day. I have a fun but also sort of doubly intimidating task. First, I have to follow Bill Keller. And second, I am introducing a session that has a very broad and somewhat intimidating heading. On the schedule, you all have the 2:30 section of today's proceedings is called The Future of Transparency. Which is a huge idea, I think, in any context. So the six of us here will try to frame that a bit, try to take some of the sort of capital T, capital F bigness out of the idea of the future and really look to where things stand at the present moment as sort of tentative evidence about what's to come for journalism, and especially as that relates to ideas of openness and transparency. So we will try to do that through the prism of entrepreneurship, which is one of the themes that a lot of the panelists today all share, through considering some of the models that move journalism beyond a loose collective of traditional news organizations and towards something that's more atomized, but also at the same time, I think, more collaborative. I think one of the things we're finding with WikiLeaks and with the universe of media more generally is that technology can be really determinative. The new tools that we're developing, which include new technologies definitely, but also include new systems and new infrastructures of information production, are laying the foundation for what journalism will become in the future. So with all that in mind, and again for the last session today, we have a group of panelists who are really at the forefront of figuring out what our new tools will be. They're journalists who embody a really intriguing and I think exciting combination of traditional news gathering backgrounds and also experimentation with new approaches to collecting and framing and disseminating information. So I'm really happy to have them with us today. I'll introduce them very quickly so that we can get to the talking and that you guys can have a lot of time to talk with them and ask your questions. So first off, over in the corner here, and we will move up, I think, after some presentations, we have Bill Allison. Bill is the editorial director of the Sunlight Foundation. I'm figuring if you guys are in this room and excited about transparency that you're familiar with Sunlight, but essentially they're an organization dedicated to fostering greater government transparency and openness, and particularly through new technologies. Bill is also a veteran investigative reporter and editor, and he's written and edited several books, among them The Cheating of America, The Buying of the President 2000, and The Buying of the President 2004. So welcome, Bill. We also have John Bohannon. Are you in the room? Excellent, hello. John is a contributing correspondent for Science magazine, where he writes about everything from molecular biology to archaeology. He also works with multimedia narrative. If I can highlight one of my personal favorites of John's work, he recently partnered with Isabella Rossellini, and that is the Isabella Rossellini, to create a series of short films, Animals Distract Me and Green Porno, which is a series that features Rossellini, and here I'm going to quote from a write-up on SundanceChannel.com, as she acts out the reproductive habits of marine animals and insects in a way that's both scientifically accurate and extremely entertaining. The series justifiably went viral online, and I think is a great example of how new tools can help journalists find compelling new ways of engaging the public around information, and also of adding new dimensions to storytelling. So thank you, John, for being here. We also have David Kaplan. David is the director of the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, which is a network of some 100 reporters that's sponsored by the Center for Public Integrity. ICIJ has journalists in 50 countries and is a great model of the new form of network journalism that relies on collaboration to maximize journalism's impact. ICIJ is dedicated to investigating cross-border crime and corruption, and actually really to accountability journalism in general. On really a global scale as well. And it uses new tools like computer-assisted reporting and data mining in producing that journalism. Before joining ICIJ, David was the chief investigative correspondent for US News and World Report, where he covered transnational crime and terrorism. He's also an author, and one of his books, Yakuza, is widely regarded to be the definitive work on organized crime in Japan. So welcome, David. And then we have Teru Kuwayama in the back there. who is a photographer who has spent most of the past 10 years reporting on conflict and humanitarian crises. He's reported in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Kashmir, and Iraq, traveling both independently and also as an embedded reporter with military forces. The images he's captured have appeared in publications like Time, Newsweek, Outside, and National Geographic. And then for our purposes on a more explicitly entrepreneurial level, Teru is a co-founder of lightstalkers.org, which is an online network of photographers, filmmakers, journalists, and members of the military and NGO communities. Earlier this year, Teru won a Night News Challenge grant to fund basecamp.org, which is an experimental project that uses social media to track a battalion of Marines deployed in Afghanistan. A very, very cool project. So welcome, Teru. And then finally, last but not least, we have Aron Pilhofer. Aron is the editor of Interactive News Technologies at the New York Times, where he leads a team of journalist developers who build data-driven applications to enhance the Times' reporting. So basically, if you've seen a very cool interactive on the Times' website, Aron most likely had something to do with it. Then in his spare time, Aron works on a project called Document Cloud, which you'll hear more about later today. Essentially, it's an interactive repository of primary source documents and a tool for document-based investigative reporting. It's just a wonderful resource for precisely the type of investigative and accountability journalism that we've been talking about today. So welcome, everyone. We're excited to have you scattered about the room and to have you soon before us up on the stage. So we'll get started. I think, are we starting, Teru, are we starting with you? Yeah. Okay, awesome. Come on up. Thanks.
Does that work? This is the mic?
Yeah.
Hello. Okay. Sorry, that was me before, really rudely chatting on a mobile phone in the back, but I'm going to Afghanistan on Monday, and I'm really desperately trying to get a satellite modem and some sat phones sent to me before I head out, so sorry. So the project that I'm working on now, it's called BaseTrack. BaseTrack is actually the name that we've given to the sort of underlying operating system. It's an open source system. It's built on WordPress, and then also to the methodology that we're using to sort of transmit the information through social media. As was mentioned, the project tracks a battalion of Marines in southern Afghanistan. The web crew really likes this like graphic stuff where it zooms in and out. It's cool. And we've got a team roughly of about 12 people who work in different capacities. There's 3 photographers who rotate in and out with the Marines, and we've got some writers going in next, and a couple of analysts from the region who kind of pump in news that from there. Oh, what's this? Oh, another Zoom. Great. Anyway, that's where we are. It's Helmand. We're around an area called Musakala, and we're basically following about 1,000 Marines. A battalion is roughly 1,000 Marines. These guys are actually 1,300 when they have their attachments with them, and we're chronicling their deployment from start to finish. This is the website. And I guess in new media speak, it's a combination of aggregated news and original reporting. When I first started talking to the Marines about this, I asked where they were getting their news and where the families of the Marines were getting their news, and the answer was mostly Fox News. So one of the first things we built was this Afghanistan news feed, which scrapes reporting from a lot of different sources, including regional sources. This is basically how the site works. It's built on a timeline and a mapping system. So posts are basically tagged to a chronology and also to their location. So anyway, this is basically what it looks like. But this is actually basically where all the action is, and we're using Facebook as a way of interfacing with the audience, and the audience is it's a very small core audience, and it is primarily the immediate families of these Marines. So there's a lot of mothers, girlfriends, and wives on this, and they're very active. They, if we disappear for a few days, they post stuff. But this is kind of a meeting point where our crew, who are people who have basically been following the situation in Afghanistan and Pakistan for a long time, every time we see something in the news that we think is interesting, we push it through here, and the idea is that these family members who are originally, at least, predominantly coming to this site to look at pictures of their kids, also encounter some information that basically we'd like to arm them with. And so, I mean, this is basically what it comes down to. It's sort of an experiment, and I call it an experiment rather than a publication or an organization. But one of the goals is to see what is the social graph of 1,000 Marines, and how many layers of Facebook could you transmit through this immediate core family around them. And anyway, I guess one of the reason I'm here now is to talk about a piece of this project, which we're just rolling out and wasn't something we intended to do at first. But early on, the command of this Marine battalion expressed a concern that because we were going to have so many people with them constantly releasing so much information on a constant basis, they were concerned that inadvertently we might release information that would compromise their security. So we started basically letting them see the stuff, letting them see photographs before we published them. And one of the things that we realized very quickly was that almost none of the photographs that they had problems with had anything to do with operational security. It was just image stuff or PR stuff, or in a case like this, you know, this 22-year-old's mustache is not quite regulation Marine Corps standard, and it should probably be like a little tighter, and you know, he's got some smudges on his face, and it was a lot of stuff like this. And I would point out to these to the commanders that, you know, this actually got nothing to do with operational security. And their response was, well, you know, anything that causes us any kind of stress impairs our operational security. So, you know, at that point, I thought, rather than getting into an endless battle over semantics about what constitutes operational security or doesn't, let's try something different. And I mean, the whole idea of blocking this operational security, compromising information, comes down to a technique called denial of information. Basically, you don't want enemy forces to be able to glean little bits of information and put them together and use them against your forces. So we've built the denial of information tool, and this is how it works, basically. A post is made, you know, the photos, text, video, etc. And then it goes into a redaction system. And the military gets a designated censor who has a free hand to block out anything that they don't like. And part of this, too, was I actually became interested in seeing, like, what does your version of reality look like? Or what does the world that you would like it to be look like? And so once they log into the system, they get a menu of the posts that are waiting for them. They get access to the text. And they can basically highlight anything they have a problem with and delete it. Or actually, not delete it. And what happens when they do that, pop-up window asks them for a justification. The reason why the information is being redacted. And they can redact as much as they want. Every time they do, they get the same pop-up window. The text was easy. Dealing with photographs was a little more complicated, but we built them this thing too. Basically, they can just click and drag, block stuff out, then same thing. Go explain yourself. And it works for the captions. Video and audio was a little more complex. We basically just didn't have the resources to make something really specifically where you could blot out individual pieces. So we basically just made it an on-off switch. So if there's something in a video or an audio clip that they don't like, just turn the whole thing off, and same thing. Enter their reason for doing such. Goes to this place, and then once it's ready to go, and this is the way it gets published. So whoever is reading the post can actually see exactly what's been removed, and they also get these scroll over windows that pop up with an explanation. You get the picture. So we actually just got this online. So we've had it tested once. We know it works, and now the question is, the ball is in their court now. But they have all the options I think that we could possibly give them. You can let it publish. You can remove anything you want. And you just have to take responsibility for it. And it's been kind of interesting because I think it's been 2 weeks now where nothing has moved. So I think the actual act of having to articulate a reason why something's problematic is actually, I don't know whether that's a barrier or whether they're just real tied up with something else right now. But I'm actually really curious to see where this goes, because there seems to suddenly be a lot less enthusiasm for holding back images, and I'm hoping in a way that this solves all our problems, and basically you make the choice how you want to deal with this. Let it publish as it is, or remove anything that you want and explain it. So that's it. That's the system.
Shoot, sorry.
Okay, we need something.
Just as we switch to, did you say in the conversation that we had, just because we're switching technology here, I'm using the time to ask the question, that it could sort of, if something is being redacted, it can sort of retroactively, after it's sort of, if it's time sensitive, then later it can come back on? Is that what the technology allows?
You can see the justification if it says something like this text reveals the location that we're about to travel to next. Mm-hmm. Once the unit is in that location, it's no longer the reason no longer holds, and so the redaction could be removed. And actually, the battalion has been very clear that they're only concerned about this while the battalion is deployed. Once the battalion comes back, they have no problem with the information being shown. So, yeah, at a certain point, people will actually make a comparison between the original and the redacted version, and see what they make.
Speak into the microphone.
Oh. Yeah, I was saying, Stephanie was asking, what's the time frame of the redaction? And the redaction, it would depend on, say, a situation where if information is being redacted because it might compromise a future operation or a position where the Marines might be going to. Once that aspect is moot, once the Marines are in that position, once the operation is over, there's no need for it to be redacted anymore. And the commanders of this battalion have actually been pretty clear that they're only concerned about this while the Marines are deployed. Once they're safely back home, this isn't a problem for them. So that's how, that's the system. I mean, I don't know how that works for mustaches that are, beyond regulation or things like that, but for things that are operational security concerns, like, I think that works. So.
Hi, I'm Bill Allison. I'm the editorial director at the Sunlight Foundation. For those of you who don't know, Sunlight has been around for about 4 years. We're a government transparency organization. We're somewhat distinct from an organization like WikiLeaks. What we're trying to do is create legal structures, requirements for government to release more data to the public and make it more available to citizens. An example of that is one of the very first things we did actually was get involved in congressional earmarks. Up until 2007, Congress didn't release any of this information in one place. These are pet projects that members of Congress sponsor, the Bridge to Nowhere in Alaska being one of the most famous ones, but there are, I think, like 6,000 earmarks in the latest Senate omnibus. But anyway, because of groups like Sunlight, we're one of several that push for this, Congress started releasing this information in a format, and this is how Taxpayers for Common Sense puts it out, as a spreadsheet. One of Sunlight's other goals is to make this more accessible to average citizens. And so what we did is we took that data from Taxpayers for Common Sense and put it on Google Earth. And each one of those little pins represents a project somewhere in a member's district. If you had Google Earth and could zoom in on this, a member of Congress called us and said, I want to see how you fly over the earmarks. And that's exactly what it's like. But you can actually zoom in down to the level of a building and see where one of these projects, $1 million to make no-drip transmission plans for Huey helicopters and whatnot. You can kind of follow these all over the country. We took the same concept and started doing it with a lot of other kinds of federal data. For example, we took federal contracts and put them on, this is obviously California, showing where federal spending was going on in states from data from usaspending.gov. We provided a lot more contextual information about members of Congress who were very interested in influence data. And in fact, what we started to do was bring together all kinds of different influence data, lobbying records, campaign finance records from the original sources, from grantees of ours like Center for Responsive Politics, which does campaign finance records and lobbying records and all kinds of other things, earmarks and whatnot. And what we try to do is make this available to users in a very, very friendly way that could be spread all over the web. This was PoliticallyJets. And what it does is give you kind of up-to-the-minute information on members of Congress from all these different sources. And somewhat, most importantly, we want it to be contextual. So here's my representative from Congress, Jim Moran, who's one of the Appropriations Committee members. And you can see from this little widget that he was granted 83 earmarks compared to 20 for the average member of Congress, how much money that was worth. And if you click on there's a little source tag, which probably doesn't quite come through in this slide. If you click on that information, it'll take you back to the original source. You can see all of the individual earmarks. And this was, we made these as easy to embed in a YouTube video. It was like 100 different newspapers around the country used it in the run up to the 2010 midterm elections. So that was one way that we tried to get this information out. We've also gotten interested in mobile apps. One of our very first ones is we took recovery.gov data and put it on an iPhone so people could walk around and see. This is a shot from Washington, D.C., and this is actually mostly lobbying firms because the application this works on, it's specific to the geographic area where you are. And the person who, when we made these slides, we're in D.C. That's the left is actually right outside of our office. And you can kind of see where the recovery contracts are. And we also have proprietary data, including a site called Party Time where people leak us invitations to fundraisers for members of Congress. And we took all of that and we put that on an iPhone app. And you can walk around Washington at night and see where the fundraisers are taking place. And you can kind of read it on the slide. We've got offices of DLA Piper, Rudnick, Gray, Carey, and so on, Apin, Strauss, Hauer, and Feld. So you can kind of see where these things are happening in D.C. A lot of them are at restaurants, though. There's Spezia Ristorante. So while we're focusing on this kind of influence data in Congress and whatnot, we have the Obama administration come in. They talk about how they're going to have this open government data. They're going to make much more government data available, which of course is music to our ears. Releasing high-value data, and I put throat clearing there because we haven't seen very much high-value data yet. But Sunlight started to ask what we could do with it. We went to the Knight Foundation, who've been very generous and given us a second grant to build public-facing apps and try to get this data to citizens in a way that will be helpful to them or useful to them. So the very first one we're working on is, I call it Bran Muffins. This is an inside joke. Everything that our technology team does is named after meat products, so everything that the reporting group does is named after baked goods. Anyway, so we figured we were going to do healthcare data, and it's really very simple. Find great data that fits together, get the data, work with our partners to refine what we're going to do with it, and then make something really cool, which isn't quite as easy as it sounds. There is no shortage of data, and MedicareData.gov and the Department of Health and Human Services is putting out a ton of data. They have a porthole for doing this. They have they've issued a challenge to developers to build apps from their data. But the approach is, if you think about this and how to make this really interesting for citizens or useful for citizens, and especially in a journalistically relevant way, this is something called Hospital Compare. It's an iPhone app that somebody already makes, and it takes data straight from Medicare data, from Centers for Medicare Services, and this is what it kind of shows you. And you can see what the average payment is for a heart attack with major complications in different hospitals in your area, people who report that the room is always clean, and in some ways this is really good. And again, it's the data straight from the agency, but I'm thinking that if I'm in a ambulance having a heart attack, I'm probably not going to have my iPhone out trying to figure out who has the cleanest sheets. So we started trying to think of other ways to handle this. This is another approach. This is county health rankings. I believe this is, I know I've forgotten already, I think it's Kaiser that's doing this. And they give you all kinds of county health data. You can break down, you know, how many people in my hometown of Lancaster, PA, you know, everything from falling off of ladders to heart disease to cancer, what the mortality rate is overall, the morbidity rate. It's fantastic stuff, and like what being a data hound, like I would love this on an iPhone app, but I don't know that most people would be as interested in this. And despite all the different metrics that they have. So is this the really good data? Is this the really interesting stuff? And this is one of the big problems we have when we're dealing with the government and trying to get data. This is a group called Resdac, or the Research Data Assistance Center, and this is one of the big problems we run into with open government information. This is a contractor that works with CMS and handles Medicare data, and it's patient-specific data. There is information in here. If you're on Medicare, your name is in their files, or you ever filed a claim. You can do amazing stuff with this information. This is a Wall Street Journal story where they got Resdac data. It took them a long time to get, and it's very expensive to get information from them. But they were able to identify by drilling down into this data. For example, they begin this story in a fantastic way, talking about a doctor that they've identified who is most likely guilty of Medicare fraud based on the pattern of billing that she does. And then they also add that the Wall Street Journal is prohibited from naming this doctor under an agreement that they reached with Resdac when they started getting this information. And one of the reasons why they probably made that agreement is it is very difficult to get information from them. When I think of a Freedom of Information Act request, I want to send it to the agency, wait an internally long period of time, but and then I want to get it back. This is the flow chart for what you have to do to get data from Resdac, and it begins with you send something to them, they send it back to you, you send it back to them, they send it back to you, they send it to CMS, which sends it back to you or back to them, and it's just like, you know, this is it is a complicated process to get data from them. One of the things is, and of course it costs a lot of money, but one of the things about that, it also very difficult to get pricing information from them. And when you think about it, this is one of the things that we were talking about in terms of doing, the app that would really be useful. If you could take how much your drugs cost, mash it together with Consumer Reports, which does all kinds of information on the types of drug reactions and comparative effectiveness of drugs, rating them within classes, and ProPublica, what they've done, and this will be under the healthcare bill, will be released to the public in a much better format, we hope. But did your doctor take money from a particular pharmaceutical company? If you can get all of that together on an iPhone app, so you get your prescription, you plug in the information, you see, geez, this is the best drug, and is my doctor getting, to just take a cruise to the Bahamas to talk about whatever particular prescription he's prescribed me, that would be a useful thing for people to have. But there's a big problem with this, and that's that getting data from Resdac is really hard, and getting information on the prescriptions is really hard, because in a lot of areas or a lot of places or a lot of different types of drugs, and the patient information is part of it. So for them to clean out all the patient information, for them to provide it to you in a way that you're not going to compromise anyone's privacy, is very difficult to get that information from them. And there's an example of this that we did a story on early on when the government released usaspending.gov. One of the agencies, and they probably started doing this in the 1960s, the file numbers that they had for each person who got these particular types of agriculture loans, part of it was their Social Security number. So you have the US government publishing Social Security numbers online as part of the spending database. Somebody noticed it. They contacted OMB Watch, which is a grantees of ours that did fedspending.org, which is kind of a precursor to usaspending.gov. And that's how we found out about it. And they had to pull down all of this data because it gave out this privacy information. And so I'm going to stop there, and we'll switch on to the next person.
All right. Hi, I'm Aron Pilhofer. I'm editor of interactive news at the New York Times. I'm wearing two hats today because, obviously, I'm sure, based on the panels to this point, there will be some questions about WikiLeaks, and most certainly it's expected that probably the New York Times will come up in that context. We did actually work on that project, so I can talk about it a little bit on the tech side. I'm here to talk a bit about Document Cloud. I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about what it is, how it works. I'll just give you a quick overview because, frankly, in the context of this conversation that we've been having today, I'm actually a lot more interested in some of the sorts of things that the whole WikiLeaks project, in particular the legal aspects of it, have kind of raised around an idea like this one. So first, let me tell you what it is. The idea is it's a Knight-funded project. The idea was to create a free site for journalists to help them analyze, share, annotate, and then ultimately publish source documents. Obviously, document-based reporting is key to virtually everything we do as reporters. And until this point, really, how have we done document-based reporting? Usually it's sitting around with a highlighter and a yellow legal pad. And see, every time I say that, there's about 5 people in the audience who start smiling because I tell the truth. This is the technology that we have out. There it is. David Kaplan has one in his hand, a yellow legal pad. He is doing document-based reporting right now. So what Document Cloud does is you can upload your documents to us. We will OCR them if they're not text readable. Optical character recognition will take a non-searchable document and make it searchable. A document, once it's in Document Cloud, looks a little like this. Here it is. This is a beautiful piece of software that my team at the Times wrote. Sorry, I use Macs, so I'm going to fumble. Once a document is in Document Cloud, we also run it through a service called OpenCalais. And what OpenCalais does is it takes that unstructured text, the text that we've either extracted or that's already in that document, and it goes through and it finds these key elements, people, places, organizations. And you can see what that looks like. Here, I'll click on, this is obviously a demo account. I don't do a lot of gardening, but just to give you an idea, here's some of the people that it pulled out of these documents, some of the organizations. You can filter in on those like so. You can I'm sorry, this is really hard to see. There it is. And you can drill right into the page where that's referenced, right? So you can already see, if you're reporting or doing a lot of document-based reporting, how useful this might be. What's really amazing about Open Calais is it does this through a series of rules. So it goes through and it tries to determine, it sees maybe three characters in a document, CIA. And it can tell whether CIA refers to the Culinary Institute of America or whether it refers to the Central Intelligence Agency through these rules. Is it perfect? No. But right now, what are we using? Yellow legal pad, highlighter, okay? So compare these two things. Anytime, even if it gets it wrong, 14 out of 15 times, that one reference gives you a key that makes that document a hit instead of a miss. What's even cooler about this is once it references this and it says, okay, this is the Central Intelligence Agency, you can link those things together. So now if you've ever done any database reporting where you have several different databases coming together in different tables, and you can sort of join those, you know, school bus drivers and say DWI convictions, things like that, and you want to kind of join them together, maybe based on name or social security number, you can start to do that kind of thing with documents now. So that's what Document Cloud is. We are built, this whole thing is sitting on the cloud. This thing is on Amazon.com, and yes, I'm going to take my second computer and move that up here. And why is that important? WikiLeaks was on Amazon.com as well. So actually, I'm sort of more interested in the Q&A, talking less about WikiLeaks and talking more about Amazon, Napster, LimeWire, iTunes, and BitTorrent, about some of these other technologies that I think actually are more applicable to a conversation about technology and journalism than some of the things that we're talking about, than even maybe WikiLeaks or Julian Assange as an individual might be right now. So let me just read to you really quickly what Amazon said when they pulled down WikiLeaks. Amazon said, quote, the terms of service that they violated, that was the basis on which Amazon shut the account down. That they violated the terms of service, and the term that they violated, among the ones that they said they violated, are, quote, that you, the user, represent and warrant that you own or otherwise control all of the rights to the content, that use of this content you supply does not violate this policy and will not cause injury to any person or entity, okay? So for that first trove of documents that they got so much criticism for, you had individuals named. That's a pretty much of a no-brainer on the second part of that clause. But what about the first part of that? That you own or represent or warrant that you otherwise control all of the rights to that content. How many documents do reporters get on a daily basis where you can make that claim? Either through FOIA or more importantly, having those documents leaked to you. So as an organization, technologically, WikiLeaks, as the source of these documents, that can easily be handled. You can pull them down off of Amazon. WikiLeaks in this sense, and I'm going to make this analogy now, is sort of the Napster, right? If you all remember way back when we were talking about music sharing and people who were trading music illegally, Napster was kind of the WikiLeaks of music sharing in a sense because it was a central server. All the music sort of went through one place. And as a result, they were very easy to for the record companies to go after and shut down. So what happened after